When the U.S. military invaded Iraq on March 20th, 2003, under suspicion that Iraq had obtained weapons of mass destruction, the Iraqi citizens revolted against the Iraqi government, causing prolonged conflict. The Iraqi government and Saddam Hussein reacted by fighting back, causing sectary violence, the rise of ISIS, human suffering, and hundreds of thousands of Iraqi deaths. To this day, Iraq is reformed, changing from a centrally planned economy to a more open one, establishing new political institutions and developing a new security apparatus. The Iraq War was actually not a war on its own, but rather a much bigger event known as War on Terror. War on Terror began after 9/11, and one of the main reasons for the 2003 invasion was for Saddam Hussein's alleged possession of weapons of mass destruction. The other main reason for the invasion of Iraq was to free the Iraqi citizens from Saddam Hussein's dictatorship, hence the name Operation Iraqi Freedom. Saddam had started a large regime known as the Anfal Campaign. In 1988, sporadic targeting of the Kurds by the Iraqi government became a systematic campaign known as Al-Anfal, the Spoils. Some estimates put the number of dead at between 50,000 and 100,000 plus people. The most infamous of these was the chemical weapons attack on the village of Halabja, which resulted in almost 5,000 civilian deaths, a scene of horror captured by foreign photographers. As stated by Donald Rumsfeld on January 20th, 2003, his regime has large, unaccounted-for stockpiles of chemical and biological weapons, including VX, sarin, mustard gas, anthrax, botulism, and possibly smallpox. And he has an active program to acquire and develop nuclear weapons. The U.S. military invaded Iraq on March 20th, 2003, known as Operation Iraqi Freedom. During the invasion, 3,000 to 7,000 Iraqi citizens were killed. Later, on May 1st, 2003, George W. Bush said major combat operations in Iraq have ended. In the Battle of Iraq, the United States and our allies had prevailed. However, the war was far from over. In 2004, Operation Vigilant Resolve, where the first Battle of Fallujah took place. The objectives for Operation Vigilant Resolve were to arrest the killers of the Blackwater personnel, clean out the foreign fighters, remove all heavy weapons from the city, and reopen Highway 10 for military traffic. The operation would ultimately fail, and the first battle would end on May 1st, 2004. However, Fallujah wasn't done yet. The second Battle of Fallujah, Operation Phantom Fury, was the bloodiest battle in the Iraq War, featuring intense urban combat and resulting in 151-plus U.S. deaths and thousands of civilian insurgent casualties. Coming just 6 months after the first Battle of Fallujah had been prematurely terminated, coalition forces managed to secure the city remarkably quickly. It took just 9 days of heavy fighting, with several additional weeks to fully clear the city afterward. The second Battle of Fallujah ended on December 23, 2004. In that same year, on August 5, 2004, a battle would occur in the city of An-Najaf. In another incident just south of Najaf, Captain Stephen A. Kinsley's reconnaissance platoon took fire, dismounted, cleared the house where the shooting came from, and captured 3 Iraqis. By the time the Marines arrived at their destination, none needed to be told that danger lived on the streets they would soon patrol. The final of the major battles in Iraq was the Battle of Ramadi, June 17, 2006. It was fought to reclaim the capital of Iraq's Anbar province from al-Qaeda insurgents. A combined force of U.S. soldiers, U.S. Marines, U.S. Navy SEALs, and Iraqi security forces fought insurgents for control of key locations in Ramadi, including the government center and the general hospital. Coalition strategy relied on establishing a number of patrol bases called combat operation posts throughout the city. Saddam Hussein was captured back in 2003 and sentenced to death in 2006 for his crimes against humanity. As the Iraqi government began reforming in 2007, U.S. forces slowly left Iraq. Yet domestic U.S. pressure and pressure from Iran included an agreement on the continued presence of U.S. forces in Iraq, and in the fall of 2011, the Obama administration decided to remove the last of the U.S. forces, some 45,000 soldiers, by the end of the year. The decision in principle to withdraw the forces from Iraq was taken in 2007 during the Bush administration. The Iraq War fully finished on December 18, 2011, when the last of the U.S. forces in Iraq were withdrawn. On December 18, 2011, the United States completely withdrew its military forces from Iraq, following a gradual withdrawal that began with an announcement by President Obama in February of 2009. The war was incredibly costly. A little over 4,400 Americans and nearly 100,000 Iraqis were killed in the conflict that lasted over 8 years. After the invasion, it was revealed that there were no stockpiles of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and that the United States government's allegations thereof had been based on unreliable or misinterpreted intelligence. President Obama said after the war, Operation Iraqi Freedom is over, and the Iraqi people now have lead responsibility for the security of their country. During the war, millions were forced to flee. In addition to those internally displaced, millions more Iraqis became refugees. At their peak in 2007, more than 2.3 million Iraqis had fled the country, and 80% had ended up in neighboring Syria and Jordan. Among those who fled in the years following the invasion were half of Iraq's registered doctors, according to the Iraqi Medical Association. Death counts in Iraq are still unknown. At a minimum, 134,000 civilians have been killed by war's violence since 2003 in Iraq. But, as described below, many deaths in Iraq were unreported or unrecorded. Thus, this number, based on tallies of government and press reports, is an undercount. If a full recording of Iraqi violent deaths due to war were to be made, the toll could be twice as high, according to Iraq Body Count, the one organization that has attempted to document all the violent deaths in Iraq that have resulted from the initiation of war 10 years ago. Thus, the toll of violent deaths due to war may be 250,000 or more people. Iraq, 20 years later, is still recovering from war. On March 20th, 2003, a multinational coalition led by the United States invaded Iraq. What resulted over the next 20 years were hundreds of thousands of civilian casualties and the destruction of key infrastructure throughout the country. Today, Iraq remains in an unstable and fragile state. Center for Civilians in Conflict, CIVIC, was born out of the need to protect civilians harmed in U.S. military operations in Iraq. 20 years later, CIVIC continues its work, advocating for the protection needs of civilians in Iraq and across the globe. Federico Borrello, CIVIC's executive director, said the war in Iraq marked a turning point in modern history for many reasons. One of the most glaring is the devastating civilian death toll. While it's impossible to know the exact numbers of civilian deaths and injuries, we know that Iraqi civilians were repeatedly targeted and killed by aerial bombings, shellings, gunshots, suicide attacks, and fires started by explosions. He also said the plight of Iraqi civilians has been a resounding reminder to the reality that there has long been a failure to respect the lives and dignity of civilians by parties to the conflict. This is true up until today in Iraq and other conflict settings, such as Syria, Ukraine, Afghanistan, and Ethiopia. Finally, he said the war in Iraq was also the beginning of CIVIC's history. Our founder, Marla Ruzicka, spent her final 2 years in Iraq trying to help Iraqi civilians harmed by the U.S. military before her life was tragically cut short. After the invasion of Iraq on March 20th, 2003, under allegations of WMDs, the Iraqi citizens revolted against the government. Saddam Hussein reacted by fighting back, causing human suffering and 250,000 plus Iraqi deaths. To this day, Iraq has reformed, transitioning toward greater stability, featuring improved security and reduced poverty.